Some say knowledge is the key to the universe. What is it that you...
If you'd like to make a call, please hang up and try again.
Okay. It is true, my friends.
What's that?
Knowledge is the key to the universe, and I know that because you are listening to a VO's Journey podcast.
You like me. You really like me.
My name is Anthony Pica, and this podcast is all about helping the new and upcoming voiceover artists grow their business.
Take a breath.
And sidestep all of the landmines
Come on, that really hurt.
I seem to jump on. Today, we have an amazing podcast. Today, I had the pleasure, nay, the honor of interviewing Sean Pratt.
It is so
Yes,
wonderful.
amazing.
We
Finally got here.
The incredible audiobook narrator. And in this episode, he goes into everything that you could possibly ever want to know about audiobooks.
Ever?
And I have to say one more time, thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Thank you again for your time and all of your knowledge. And he is going to be billing us.
I'm broke.
So, without further painstaking stalling on my part,
Let's do it.
This is VO's Journey.
Sean Allen Pratt, baby!
With your host, the incomparable Anthony Pica.
I am so thrilled to be with Sean Allen Pratt. I have to tell you, I met this man, I would say, I don't know, about a year ago, and I found him on social media, and I was just taken back, and I actually worked with Sean, and he has helped me so much just become a better audiobook narrator. Thank you so much, Sean, for being on the podcast today. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Glad to be here.
Well, we have a bunch of questions. I have some questions for you, and I also took some questions from people in the group. I'm going to be asking about it, but I know you very well, and I know many other people do, but there are probably some out there who might not know you as well. So, if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about how you got started in your background in voiceover.
Let's see. So, do the Hollywood entertainment version. Born and raised in Oklahoma City, started acting in school and with local theater groups when I was 10. Went up to college to become an actor. Started working professionally while I was still in college to getting my BFA in acting. Graduated. I wanted to become a classical theater actor. But at the time I went to school in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I spent 2 years after graduation running around New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, Colorado, doing like Shakespeare in the Park and doing Westerns because I knew how to shoot a gun and ride a horse and had long, cool hair, young guns back then.
Yeah.
And moved to New York around 1990 and started working doing classical theater. I was a member of the Pearl, which was an off-Broadway classical company that had a resident acting troupe, and I was the resident male juvenile for 4 years. I did all the young lover parts, did a lot of comedy, and got into audiobooks around 96 when I moved to Washington, D.C. I moved in with a girlfriend, sort of started my whole life over again. And so that was in 96. I fell into it because I didn't have any acting work at the time. And I was desperate to find something to do. And I remember a conversation I'd had with an actor in Washington, D.C. when I'd been there previously doing a play, and he narrated on the side. And he introduced me to Grover Gardner, who's very well known in our industry. And Grover and I became friends, and he helped me get in. And one thing led to another. That was, since 96, so that's been, 23 years and 1,000 books ago. And, I did fiction initially because that's what was in front of me. I'd never done any kind of really I mean, really had never done any kind of VO before. I'd done a non-commercial here or there, but nothing, deliberate. I just wanted to do theater. And so I really enjoyed doing fiction for a long, long time. But then I just needed more work. I wanted to go full time. When I first started, I was getting out of theater. I was now doing television and movies and industrial training films and that kind of stuff, corporate spokesperson work. And so it was just one more. It was initially going to be one more thing I did, and it just kept growing and growing until it supplanted all those other things, and it became a full-time gig for me, pretty much. But by the time 3 or 4 years into it, I was working pretty much full-time as an audiobook narrator.
That is so awesome. Did you work from home? I mean, back then, right? I guess you said in the early 2000s, really, when you got big into it. Were you in a studio, or did you have your own home studio then too?
When I first started, Grover had some studio space at his house, and you would sign up for it, like a 3-hour chunk. And of course, being the new guy, it means I had the 6 to 9 in the evening spot. But I was a carpenter. That's how I got through college. I used to frame houses and do construction work and so on. So once I saw that this was a viable venue to work in as a performer, this is how much the industry's changed. Books on Tape sent me all my equipment, and I paid it off. Like, I forgot how much it was. Like 25% of every check went to pay back the ADAT machine, the mixer, all that stuff, and the microphone. And it's been that's another universe, isn't it? And so I built my very first booth in a house I was renting. I called it the Gemini capsule. It was so small. It was 4x4 on the outside. And it was so tiny. Had no ventilation. About every 45 minutes, I'd have to open the door. I'd faint from, breathing my own carbon dioxide, monoxide, whatever. And so I fall into a weird category. Of the 1,000 books I've done, I can literally count on my hands the number of times I actually went into a studio to record.
Wow. That's
awesome.
Awesome.
Less than 10.
Man, thank you. I know, and I know you mentioned it briefly, but 1,000, and I know it's well over 1,000 books now that I think you've done. I mean, that just blows my mind. It's incredible. It's incredible.
Blows my mind too, man.
All right. So on a VO's journey, we have a lot of newer voiceover artists getting into the business. And some people who've been in for just a little bit, but mostly up and coming people. And so I like to ask professionals like yourself some questions about, voiceover artists getting started. So one of the questions I have is, what would you recommend for brand new voice actors starting out in audiobooks? What would you recommend that they do? Just like a quick snapshot of ABC. Like, what are some things they could do just getting started in audiobooks?
My go-to all the time is to take the test. There's a video on my YouTube channel that details it, but I'll give you the short version. And the reason why is because if they've already been doing VO in general, like, whether it's commercials or video games or cartoons, this is a different kind of VO. It's like running a marathon. And what they've probably been doing is running sprints. And I've discovered over the years, even with my friends who do VO, like I have friends in LA and New York who do all those other kinds of, jobs, who wouldn't touch audiobooks with a 10-foot pole because it's just too much work. They're like, I'm used to walking into the studio and 30 minutes later being done. And so it's about temperament, I think, more than talent, frankly. So the test, and like I said in my YouTube video, is, get into your booth, or if you don't have a booth, set up a confined space in a closet or facing into the corner of a room. Pick a piece of material you like to read. I prefer nonfiction, but it could be fiction, doesn't really matter. Turn the light out, shine a light on it, sit down in your chair, and read out loud for 2 to 3 hours a day, every day for 2 weeks. And and if you make a mistake, back up and start the sentence again. If you hit a word you don't know how to pronounce, go look it up. And don't just mumble your way through it. Pretend you're performing for a group of people like a storyteller would. If you do that every day for 2 to 3 hours, for 2 weeks, that will tell you more quickly than anything else whether or not you really want to do this. Yeah.
That's
It's
a
really
great
that
test.
simple. It really is. I mean, you've experienced, and I get comments on that YouTube video all the time where people say, "Wow, I had such a great time. I can't wait to do it again." Or they go, "You've absolutely convinced me that I never ever want to do this in my entire life. I lasted 5 minutes. This is ridiculous." You know.
Right.
So I feel like that way they've only spent their time. They haven't spent any money on classes or equipment. You know. So really, that's that's it. It's that simple, I think.
Wow. Great test. So do you think, let's say someone does have the capacity to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think right now, from what you see in the industry, audiobooks are a great place to start, or is there somewhere else? Because I know with ACX, there is an awful lot. It just seems, now I'm not saying it's the best writing per se, but there's a lot of books that keep flooding into the market. So there's definitely business out there. But the question is, do you think audiobooks is a great place to start?
Well, it depends on what your goals are. I mean, if you want to do lots of crazy character voices, no, because it's about in fiction, it's about acting. If you want to do over the top, like, video games, if that's a real, so it really boils down to your goals. If you want to do long form narration, yes, by all means. And ACX is not bad. I mean, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of junk on there. But there's a lot of stuff that, while it's not all Hemingway, there's stuff that's passable and that you can learn from. It's no different than if you wanted to be a theater actor. You start off by being, second soldier on the left, lady in waiting number 4, and then you build up to a one-liner, and then you get a couple of scenes, and the same thing happens more or less with audiobooks. You're going to do stuff that's not great, but you at least you'll have the experience. And I say, don't do crappy, really terrible stuff that's needs to be re-edited, or the topic is ridiculous, or it's but that's their call. I differ with some of my colleagues who say, don't do any of those kinds of short books, those little 3-hour books or 2-hour books. My attitude is, if the topic is interesting and you like it, it's a great place to get your feet wet. God forbid you should say yes to a 16-hour nonfiction book on the history of bread because it's, they're offering a hybrid deal on it or something.
Right.
You're going to be way in over your head, because we have to do so much more. That's the other thing too about temperament. If they can pass the test, they also have to understand initially they're going to be wearing all the hats: the talent, the engineer, the editor, the producer. They have to know how to wear all those and have a good workflow. So they have to learn to do their research, they perform it, they proof it, they edit it, they master it. Because if they job that stuff out, they're going to go into debt. So I make my students learn all those things early on, so at least they can say yes to these smaller projects and get the experience. Then of course.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, this is something I personally wanted to ask you, and it's on this note that you're talking about. And I know Scott Brick. I know he's a friend of yours, and in my speakings with him, I find the same thing in both of you. But you are so knowledgeable about, and I suppose you've read a lot of books, but you're so knowledgeable, right, about the craft. And I know when I speak to Scott, he's very big about learning the craft of writing too. So my question to you, and that's what always it's amazing speaking to you, because you're always you have so much information that is so important to what we do. How do you look at that as being important, becoming a better, doing like research on writing itself, getting to know the act of writing? Let's say you want to do audiobooks. Do you ever do any of that research?
Oh yeah. Well, I didn't do it deliberately in the sense of taking a course on writing. I mean, I took a course on writing in college because it was elective, but it's more, and because the world I live in is in nonfiction. Nonfiction is all about structure. It's all about learning to see the structure inside the author's thought process, and you have to work backwards. So you're reverse engineering your thought process to get to the essential points, because ultimately, like in nonfiction, it's that old adage in the theaters, if you make everything sound important, then nothing is important. So you have to decide, you have to figure out what is the most important thing. And I teach my students how to find that, because that's what I do, right? And that's learning the structure of writing itself. And the same applies for fiction. If you learn, a lot of writers, they take writing classes. So like, okay, here's, I see this book they've written this as a 5-act or a 3-act play. So we have our, and if you know what each of those acts are structurally, the book just tells itself. It's like when you watch a movie, right. There's always going to be that one act 4, when our heroes had the crap kicked out of them, and then they rally to act 5, and then they defeat Thanos, and those things, you can just see them coming, right? A mile off. Well, I say that when I first started reading, of course, I had no clue. But once you learn to see the structure, then that can help inform your performance choices, your pacing, how far to push a character. It also helps in nonfiction because it helps you know which tool to pull out in which moment for the storytelling, to keep it fresh for the listener and for yourself. So yeah, absolutely. The craft of writing, I wouldn't go overboard. There's plenty of, the wonderful thing about the century we live in, there's tons of free videos on YouTube talking about the craft of writing. Go watch a few of them and it'll show you exactly, you'll understand why the twist is this, why the butler did it, or why is there a plot twist here, or why the author is making the case, whatever. And getting back to the book we were talking about doing, the power of your subconscious mind, which is really freaky that we're both recording the same book at the same time.
That is freaky.
So what he does there, if you look at the structure of it, he talks about, okay, here's the idea, the power of the subconscious mind. Then he applies it to your job, your marriage, overcoming alcoholism, dealing with imposter syndrome. And then he lays out the concept again, but with a slightly different twist for that new chapter. And then he gives you a series of anecdotes and illustrations about real life participants who did what he told them to do and how it worked out for them. And then he does a recap at the end with the bullet pointed items to remember. That's the structure. So if I know that going into chapter 7 or whatever, then I know how to pace myself through it. I know what to expect, at this point in the chapter, and that informs more of my performance. So yeah, absolutely. Seeing structure is important.
Awesome, man. Thank you for that, because I think that's so important and probably something that new people aren't even thinking about. Let's get into some of the nitty gritty about just some actual things for voiceover artists in the audiobook industry. So an audiobook demo. Can you just explain to us briefly? Most people, when we get in, it's all about, you got to have your commercial demo. That's by far the most important thing.
Right.
And then everything's an offshoot. But I know in working with you, there's such a difference with an audiobook demo. So
here's the short course. First of all, when we do a demo, it's not the same. It's not a highlight reel like your commercial demo. If you're going to do a demo that's meant to be like a murder mystery, it is one selection from one book. Okay. It's not a series of them because they want to hear you tell the story. I'll just talk about fiction. It needs to have a strong beginning and a definite ending. It can be abridged, right? So you don't have to, no one's going to ultimately care what book it came from as long as you tell the story. The length can vary between 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how long it takes you to get to the beginning, middle, and end. But so for instance, the example I'd make up is, let's say I'm going to do a murder mystery demo. So it opens with the hero detective driving by the creepy house, and they see the villain in the window. So he slams on his brakes, jumps out of his car, grabs his gun, kicks the door in, starts looking around for the bad guy, but then suddenly the door shuts, the light goes out, and there's a gunshot. So beginning, middle, end. Now, if that came from chapter 7 and the actual chapter would narrate at 15 minutes, well, just cut it down. Take a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here. No one's going to care. They just want to hear, can you tell the story, right? And you need to be working within genres, which we can talk about in a bit, about that fit your voice. That's a different issue. When it comes to nonfiction, the best place to find, and once again, 3 to 5 minutes, the best place to find a nonfiction demo, let's say you're going to do one on self-help category, exercise, romance, how to be a better parent, how to deal with stress, whatever. Those are all self-help books. The best place to look for it is in the intro, preface, or foreword, because that's where the author is laying out their idea in the most succinct way possible, and they're creating a sense of excitement about what's to come. So like, when I show you the 5 secrets of overcoming your stress, which are this, and this, you're going to be the most calm Buddha you've ever known. Let's get going. That's what you want in the demo, a sense of excitement around that. And if you can mention the topic of the book inside, that's great. The other thing though, is that you need to be narrating in nonfiction, you need to be narrating books that fit the age demographic of your voice. So even though I'm 53, I don't sound like I'm 53, which is a real, is giving me a much bigger window. I have students. I have a new student. He's 22 years old. He sounds like James Earl Jones. I kid you not. This guy, he sounds like he is really 50 or 60 years old. And so he's in an interesting place, because when it comes time for demos, we're going to be sort of challenged, like, where do we find those for him? Because he's going to be talking to an audience that's older than he is, because his voice is so unique. But it is about how old does your voice sound, right? And once again, it can be edited down. It does not have to be unabridged. And usually you can slate the demo or not. You can argue it either way. Doesn't really matter to me.
And slating is, slating
is,
is,
like, this is Sean Pratt reading from, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy. What I do though is, when I label my demos, and what I make my students do, is you label them as generically as possible. So the book we just mentioned, it would be labeled as nonfiction, self-help, subconscious mind, or power of positive thinking. You would just give it a generic topic, because when someone would go to my website to look for that, they would just be looking for, I just need a nonfiction kind of, there's a self-help one. Okay, let's listen to that. Because if I just said, they're not going to know. If I have the title of my book, it's called The Stripy Red Pen. What the hell does that mean? Right? What is that? Right? And the last thing I'd say about it too is the number of demos you have. There's a concept in sociology known as the paradox of choice. And the easiest illustration is, for everybody who has Hulu or Netflix, is when you sit down and you want to watch an action movie. So you go to that category in Netflix, and then 45 minutes later, you're still scrolling through options because you can't make up your mind.
Oh, I hate that.
That's because you have, right. Well, that's because you have too many choices and they all look about the same, right? So my rule is, it's better to have 5 or 6 really good good demos, audiobook demos, than it is to have 10 or 20, because no one is going to listen to all of them. And if you give them too many choices, they're going to go, oh, screw it. They'll just listen to the first one, and that's it.
Thank you so much. That's awesome
Less
information.
Is more.
Thank you.
Less is more.
Okay, so speaking of that, really quick, because I get asked this question a lot. When it comes to choosing the books that you want to do, does it matter if it is a bestseller, if it's free and public domain? Does that matter when you're using it for a demo?
Generally speaking, I would stay away from like the iconic books. Like, don't do Harry Potter. Okay, excuse me. Jim Dale did it. That's good enough. You can't match Jim. There's so much material out there. The notion of doing something as a quote hit, to me, is sort of silly, because you can find a great, say, family kitchen table scene in a book no one's heard of. And since you're not going to be giving me the title, it's not going to matter. And one step further, by the way, let's say you find a book that takes place around a kitchen table that takes place in, I don't know, Chicago. But you can take that same scene without ever mentioning that it's in Chicago. And if the language is right, as long as it's neutral enough, it could be in London or Paris. And so you can show off your accents, you see, right? No, there's plenty of material out there. Good writing is good writing, whether or not it got famous or not.
I was going to say that too. I know an old theater audition trick was you don't want to pick something that so many people have done before, but a good writer is a good writer. So you can pick some of their work that might not be as well known, and
Right.
you're still going to have great writing. So
Yeah.
great, awesome.
And it takes time. It takes time, because the one thing I was going to mention is that I work with my students. We have to learn to define their voice. One of the biggest, it's a personal pet peeve, and it launched me down this path of this. In commercial VO, we have a lot of people who have taglines, and the right voice right now. My voice when your voice sucks, and those kinds of things. And while those are cute and sometimes memorable, they actually don't tell me a damn thing about the voice until I hit the demo. Well, that's a missed opportunity, because we are highly suggestible animals. When you walk down the street, people walk towards you, you are making instant judgments about those people. Are they, basically the most elemental is, are they safe or not? Right? And then you go, oh, he's dressed like so-and-so, he's a businessman, or she's a mom, or that's a teenager, or that guy looks like a punk, or whatever. We have a moment when the consumer, the casting person, whatever, hits our demos, to influence that by giving them suggestible words, adjectives, and phrases that this is what my voice sounds like. I tell people that my voice is generous, upbeat, and inspirational, which is one reason why I do tons and tons of material like that. I mean, like this subconscious book, right? And because not every voice can fit every genre, if you know what your voice sounds like, that also should inform what kind of demo you choose. It would be a mistake for me to try to do a hard-boiled, bloody murder mystery. That's just not the voice that they want for that genre, right? So if you know that about yourself, or if you have a strong accent, play to your accent. Play to your demo should always play to your strengths. It's not be a stretch. They play to your strengths, always.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
Here's
I'll send you my bill later.
Okay, yeah, exactly. I'm telling you what, this is awesome. You did mention it before about your test about sitting for 2 hours, but I had a question about how long do you record yourself on an average when you sit down to record? Because I know the books I've done now, I mean, it especially when they're big books and you have a timetable, you got to knock out some recording. So how long do you sit down, like on an average, to record a day?
Right. Well, before I started coaching one-on-one, because now I coach in the morning, so that would have been my morning session. But back before I started doing, this has been 4 or 5 years of doing this now, one-on-one. I would have a morning session and a late afternoon session, and each one of those clocked in at about 2.5 hours. And so in a 5-hour day, that's with breaks total, I would generate 2 finished hours of material, ready to be proofed, because I use punch and roll when I narrate. Okay, I had to, because I learned back in the Stone Age when we had tape. Right, we used to narrate on a thing called an ADAT system, and it used VHS tape, so we couldn't actually splice anything together. That VHS tape held 8 emulsion lines, magnetic lines on it, which translated into 4 cassettes. There's an old term, right? So you didn't have the luxury of cutting, slicing, and dicing a performance together. You had to punch in and roll over the mistake until you screwed up, and you stopped, rewound the tape, listened, punched in, and rolled over the mistake, and so on. So it was like building a train car, or a train car by car, I should say. So my average is about 2 to 1. Okay. So in a given day when I was narrating full on, and I was doing 2 finished hours a day, I was recording anywhere between 10 to 14 hours a week, depending on the client and the deadline. Sometimes with freelancers, you get a book and the deadline, you're like, well, there goes my weekend. I could do stretch. I could do more than 2 hours if I had to, but I don't. I know I have friends who are narrators who are they have a throat of iron. They can just get in there and talk for hours, and they sound the same. I'm not the same way. I don't have that kind of voice. So 2 hours a day was my was my go-to. That's what I calculated in my head. 10-hour books takes 5 days of recording, not including prep and stuff.
Now, I know with schedule matters, but do you do your own editing and mastering, or do you have someone else do it? And what would you recommend for people, because you're at a certain place in your career, but what would you recommend for new people starting? Should they have someone do their editing and mastering for them?
My go-to, what I teach my students, is they need to learn all of it themselves to begin with. They need to learn how to proof. They need to learn how to edit. Now, editing and engineering are two separate jobs. Those two terms get thrown around. Editing is the act of inserting recording, like corrections into its proper spot in the recording. That's editing, literally like a copy editor inserts words. Engineering, which that sometimes gets folded underneath, is the act of taking those files and mastering them, running them through the cycle of compression and equalization and the stack and so on. But initially, I make my students learn all those hats. And here's the thing: if you're doing punch and roll, you're editing in real time. So that's one of the biggest mistakes that you have with a lot of new people, because they their first software is like Adobe Audition or Audacity, and they're doing like a dog clicker or whatever, which means they have to go back and listen to the whole thing live again and copy and paste a performance together. So it's mandatory that all my students learn punch and roll.
Well, that is
the first place. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was sorry. You mentioned Adobe Audition. I was going to say they have now that punch and roll option on Adobe Audition where you can literally
finally.
I
use
the
Studio
button.
One because I just like it's very accessible, very easy. I used to use Pro Tools for years, and it was a huge pain in the ass, frankly. Studio One, I've never had it crash on me. I think it's a great piece of software. And I had Joe Brookhouse set it up for me. He's a narrator and engineer, because I'm not tech savvy at all. There's a reason why I take my car to Jiffy Lube. I could change my oil, maybe, but I don't want to. I'll pay somebody to do it for me.
Right.
So Joe taught me how to do, he set my stack. He did showed me punch and roll on it for that software. But the first place I tell my students they should spend their money, once they learn all those steps, they need to spend their money on a proofer. You need to have a fresh set of ears. Listen to your record, because you can be following along and see the word, and the word is systemic, but you said systematic, and you can still proof it and still make the same mistake, right? Or you mispronounce a word that you've heard all your life wrong, or incorrectly, I should say.
Yes.
You need a fresh pair of ears. That's the first place you spend your money. The second place is then, if you're going to have someone engineer it for you, to me, that's a matter of you're doing well enough that you need to do it just to keep your workflow going. My guy, he engineers it. He has a proofer he works with in-house, and I pay him a flat fee for all of it, for my private stuff. Now, of course, when I work for the bigger publishers, they do all that in-house. So when I finish chapter 7 and mix it down as one file, I immediately upload it to Tantor's FTP site. And when I'm done, they'll be downloaded for the proofers, and I get my corrections back, and I send those in wild as one track. And then their engineering and editing department drop all that stuff in and fix it and master it.
Do you recommend? Well, you know what? Let me get into the questions. We've been talking forever. Sure. You've been incredible. I've got some questions from some people in the group. The first one comes from Chris. He asked, do you ever use dynamic microphones when producing an audiobook? And if so, which do you use? And I guess in this case, have you ever used one?
I've always, the very first microphone I ever had was a Shure microphone I got at Radio Shack. That was 25 years ago. But soon after that, I purchased an AKG. I forgot the exact model number because I no longer have it. It was it was a good, I don't know, $1,500 microphone. The one I have now is another AKG. It's a 214. I got a sweet deal. I like it a lot. I don't play around with my microphones that much. If it sounds right and my engineer says it's a good sound, that's good enough for me. So I'm not a real tech junkie, to be perfectly honest with you. If it works, it works. I agree with Jeffrey Kafer when he says that he's heard crappy stories told on excellent equipment and brilliant stories told on mediocre equipment. To me, it always gets back to the story.
Absolutely. I think, and you would know, but I think Chris is also talking about maybe his space and what the difference with a dynamic microphone as opposed to a microphone that has a condenser mic that might pick up more. I think that's what he's
right. Oh yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, you have to, once again, that's why if you're, to me, when you're setting up your space, you talk with an engineer. You got to be careful though with engineers, because it's like having a car enthusiast help you pick out a new car.
Right.
Next thing you know, you talk you into buying a Mercedes, and you don't need a Mercedes. You needed a Chevy. So I had, when there was one mic I had for a while. I had a little baby, a Yeti, the little snowball.
Yeah.
Microphone.
I had a snowball too.
And it was too sensitive for my space. It's a great one if you're on stage performing as a folk singer or whatever. It was just too sensitive for my space, and it never quite worked. And so I only had it for a few months, and I'm like, it's a great mic, but it's not right for where I'm at. So yeah, it pays to talk with someone and show someone your space and send in sample recordings. But have a budget. You can have a great sound for a couple $100. You don't have to break the bank to get a good mic. Right.
Great. Let's move on to the next one. This is from Matt C. He said, and I'm going to try to get this right, what he's trying to say. He said he's interested to know how many breaks you take recording-wise. Like, is it every chapter or every few paragraphs? I'm trying to figure out exactly what it is, and maybe that makes sense to you.
Yeah. It's actually, it has nothing to do with the chapters. It's about time. So when I go in to record, let's say, so I have an afternoon session today. So I'll start around 4:00 and I'll go till about 6:30. So when I start at 4, turn my phone off, no distractions, no Facebook. And I record for about 45 minutes straight on, maybe 50. And however much I get done in that time, which usually is 2 to 1, I'll get that done. And then around 45, 50 minutes, I stop because it's stuffy. I had to turn the AC off. I get up, kick it on for 10 minutes, get a glass of water, clear my head, walk around, come back. Now it's 5:00, shut everything down. I'm back on it. So for me, it's that kind of a schedule. And because the term chapter is like the term book, it's an elastic thing. I've narrated books that were 4 hours long and books that were 40. I've narrated chapters that were 10 minutes long and some that were an hour long. So really, to me, it's at the end of the day, this is how type A I am. I actually calculate my actual minutes. I add up how many finished minutes did I do that day, because my target is X. So that's really how I calculate what I do, not by the number of chapters I'm working on.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you. This next one comes from Jessica, and she asks, do you find more business? Okay, good. Because we've talked a lot about the craft. Now we're talking a little bit about marketing. Do you find more business by contacting authors directly or working with publishing houses or places like Findaway or ACX? And so, where are you finding maybe your business now, and where would you suggest new people find business?
Well, those are two different questions, because the majority of my business comes from the major publishers, okay. Tantor, Blackstone, Macmillan, HarperCollins, Recorded Books. Okay. But I do get private stuff because I market all the time. I'm on social media talking about what I do, and for instance, I'll give you a perfect example. Anytime I do a nonfiction book, I'm a member of about half a dozen nonfiction business author writer groups on Facebook, actually more like a dozen. And so, like for this book, when I posted about it on social media, on all my 4 platforms of Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, inside LinkedIn, I found all those groups I'm a member of and said, hey, I'm recording this really cool classic. And so I was recently contacted, not for this particular example, but a few months ago, I posted a nonfiction book. An author in one of those groups saw it and contacted me, and we spoke, and I'm going to be doing his book in the fall. So for me, it's about that. I also, when I see that I have a gap in my schedule coming up, I'll send out an email to the publishers and producers I work with, telling them what I've done recently and saying, I don't necessarily say, do you have anything available? Because that's implied, right? It's more about staying in touch. So really it's about, like it or not, your presence on social media is important. Having a mailing list that you stay in touch with is important. Without getting into the finer points of that, but that's how it is. And if you want to go hunt down work, if you have your own contract that you can negotiate with, go on Amazon.com and go to the genres you're good in, or go to a writer's conference. You can, I push my students toward the end of my work with them to find conferences that are writers' conferences usually fall into two categories. They're either by genre or geography. So you're going to go to the Southwest Writers Conference or the Texas Writers Conference, or you're going to go to ThrillerCon. So if you do tons of thrillers, it would pay dividends to save your money up and go there. You may be one of the few narrators in the whole convention. And if you're the expert in the room, suddenly you're going to hold a lot of people's hands when they say, can you do my book? And suddenly it's like, as they say in the military, it's a target-rich environment. So
that's awesome.
That's called proactive auditioning.
Cool.
You're going after the stuff you can do.
Now
but I fall in an odd category because I don't do a lot of that because, like I said, I work with the major publishers.
Well, speaking of the major publishers, let's say Jessica wanted to reach out to them. What would be the best way to start to reach out to bigger publishers to be an audiobook narrator for them?
Well, go online and follow the guidelines that they put, because they all have guidelines about submissions. So go ahead and do that. You would need to put together basically a sort of a resume of what you've done, some samples, but follow the guidelines. The other one, like it or not, is go to the join APA and come to APAC, or sign up for the Director's Diagnostic or speed dating. I think that's an excellent way if you win the lottery.
So now, what is that? What is that?
So they have it now throughout the year, but at the audiobook conference we have every year in New York, we have a Director's Diagnostic, which is sort of like, it's a one-on-one with a person in the industry for, I forgot how long it is, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes or whatever. And so you get one person. So it's almost like an extended audition where you talk about what you do, you might read for them and so on, but it's a little more in depth and they give you feedback.
Oh,
right?
Cool.
But you may audition for an engineer, but you also may audition for a casting director. You never know. The speed dating is exactly what it means. They have, like, in those situations, the APA will have, say, 20 different people, and you have 5 minutes at each table, but you're going to see all 20 of them. So that's an amazing opportunity if you've got everything lined up to get your face in front of them. Plenty of my students have booked work by going to those events, but they're done by lottery. You have to join the APA, submit, and if you get in once, you can't get in for another 6 months or a year or whatever. But it's a great way to get your face in front of people, because the truth of the matter is, it's much harder to break through that, because during the day-to-day, all those people are understaffed and overworked. They do listen to stuff, but they only have so many hours in the day. I think another interesting way to get in with them is find those other authors, and you develop relationships with those authors, especially in fiction. And so, you do a royalty share book with the author, with Gus Johnson for his first book, and the second book maybe for PFH, but the third book gets picked up by Tantor. Well, now you're part of the series, and Gus goes, I want her or him to do that book for me. I want Jessica to do that book. And now Jessica has a brand new client. That actually does happen on a fairly regular basis.
Right. That makes sense. Awesome. Thank you. Michael says, what would you suggest as far as types of books, length or anything else for someone who has experience as a voice actor but has never narrated an audiobook?
Once again, this gets back to that temperament issue. I would start with something, 4 to 6 hours. See if you like it. Like I said, if you sign on, if you get sucked into doing, a 20-hour fantasy troll adventure, whatever, you're gonna want to jump off a bridge. I'm sorry, you are. It's gonna be too much. You can't, don't need anything bigger than your head, as they say.
Gotcha.
So I would say get your feet wet with something short.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. You know what? We've come to the end. I mean, the information, like I said, I feel like you should send me a bill because that's pretty amazing. But I have one more question for you, and I ask everybody this question, and it is, if you, Sean Pratt, had to start again today and you erased the name of Sean Pratt from anyone's knowledge, now you still have skill and you have the equipment and everything. Where would you, how would you start over? What would you do?
I would start on ACX. I would. Oh wait, let me just define the premise. That I've never done an audiobook before. That's the premise.
No, so yes, the premise is you've never done one before. No one knows your name.
Okay, so what I would do is I would start with getting some coaching to know what the hell I'm talking about or doing. I would watch as many free things on YouTube as I could about the business. I would start practicing every day because I'd realize very quickly that it's a different kind of VO. And then I would start on ACX because that's where, no big publisher is going to look at me. I don't have any experience, so an author will probably not look at me. So I have to go to the marketplace, which is ACX, which is a huge boon because when I started, now granted, I just got lucky. My first 2 clients were Blackstone and Books on Tape, but that was a different universe back then. But I would do what the beginners are doing now. It wouldn't be any different. But I think the key that I would have that I'd bring to the table is that having spent my life in show business, I know the value of the business side about marketing and networking and advertising. I would immediately be looking at other narrators' websites and demos and finding those opportunities for networking and marketing myself and figuring out how I fit. It's been, like I said, I started in the theater, then I switched over to TV and film. The Sean Pratt that works in theater is different from the one that worked in TV and film. The type of the roles I got. And so I would want to figure out what is my type in the industry. And that's what I would focus on.
Huh. That is so cool.
It wouldn't be too much different than what I make my students do.
And you'd find out that type by practicing, looking around, listening.
It's a feedback loop, really. I would listen, and I tell my students, listen to, get Audiophile magazine, find genres you're interested in. Do you hear your voice in that genre? I may love hard-boiled detective novels personally, but I'll very quickly realize my voice is not there. I never hear anybody who sounds like me. Where do I find me? And that's one of those, for some performers, can be a real challenge to overcome because the genre or the place you get work in may not be the thing that really excites you initially. So with my voice, let's say I wasn't really keen on doing uplifting, positive self-help books, but that's where the work was. What you learn if you're going to be in show business in the long haul is you take that work. Yeah, it becomes your bread and butter. And then over time, you get to know people who'll take a chance on you doing something different. And we've seen that with performers in Hollywood who started as one thing. Like Tom Hanks is a perfect example. He was the funny guy who over time became a serious leading man actor. But initially he went with what was in front of him. So in this particular scenario, I wouldn't have any idea. I'd have to listen and then experiment and see what books I get. That's the other piece of it too. You audition for lots of stuff, and ultimately in the aggregate, the books you keep getting, there's a common denominator there. There's a connection. If you keep getting cozy mysteries, there's got to be a reason. If you keep getting, gothic graphic horror movies or horror novels or, really hardcore erotica or sweet romance, there's a reason.
Okay, so just before we go, can you please let everybody know how they can get in touch with you if they want to work with you?
Sure. You can find me online at seanprattpresents.com, and there's a contact page there. Or you can just email me directly at seanpratt@comcast.net. And I'm all over social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. I usually try to turn my emails around within 24 hours. So you're always welcome. If you're interested in working with me, send me an email. I'll shoot you some information about what I do. And I always offer a free consultation with a prospective student to explain in detail what it is I do and how I do it.
Great. Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Sean, thank you so much for your time. It has been an honor. And I know this has been one of the best podcasts yet because of you. Thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you again and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care now.
Thank you, Sean Allen Pratt, for being amazing. I really, really thank you for being a part of a VO's journey.
You rock!
And please, please, please make sure that you follow a VO's journey. Make sure you share it, like it. I don't know, give it an award. And the Academy Award goes to Sean Pratt. Wait, this is my show. Anywho, it is wonderful to do this as always, and thank you from the bottom of my humble
You need
heart.
a piece of humble pie.
It's hard to say that now, right? After I asked for an award, but I love you anyways. All right, everybody, take it easy. Peace.
I want to thank the Academy for really taking us in and making us feel like one of the people.
Wait, I'm not British.